Imagine a vibrant, natural play area where children are not only engaged in play, but also develop a deeper connection to the environment. Creating green spaces in your childcare center isn't just about adding a few plants. It's about building an outdoor classroom where kids can explore, learn, and thrive. Green spaces enhance physical, emotional, and cognitive development, provide a safe and nurturing environment where children's imaginations can grow along the side of the plants that they care for. Today we are joined with owner Aubrey Rowland of Green Space Learning. And we're going to talk a little bit and explore a little bit about how you can transform your child care center into a green oasis that nurtures young minds. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So tell folks a little bit about yourself.
So I am here in Fort Worth, Texas, and have been in early childhood for always. And I went through my college years here in North Texas in early childhood. And after being a teacher and a director for a number of years, I started Green Space Learning, which was intended to the title at that time, Green Space, was really a representation of how I felt about childhood. That I think we see childhood often as something that would be improved by development, the way we often do, empty spaces, empty lots, green spaces. But there's also the option to allow for that natural development, to let what's going to happen and provide the support for it. And so I feel like our community, our societies, our kind of feeling towards childhood is that it's a problem to be solved. It's a starting point. It is a project. It's something that we must develop, and just kind of holding space for childhood in a very organic way is really what Green Space Learning is all about. So we started out with professional development and training and working with young children and providers on play-based and natural environments, and then eventually started creating those spaces. So designing and installing natural playgrounds and helping centers and programs bring more nature into the classroom and bring the children outside a little bit more. We also have some nature preschools and after-school programs here in North Texas that do that work every day with young children.
Wow, that's awesome. And you know what you said is so true, because I think about it as educators, we're always like, what's the milestone? How do we get to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing? We're always worried about the next thing that we don't really embrace the now. And so I think, you hit the nail on the head there with that statement.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. So that's a lovely thought and concept as I sit and reflect about that. So let's talk about maybe what are some of the key elements of an effective green space in a child care setting?
Well, I think first and foremost, it needs to be something that's inspired by the children in that program. So we as adults love makeover. We love to have, everything kind of set and beautiful and have that after photo and then bring the children in to enjoy it. The reality of nature spaces and environments for young children in general is that they are going to be ever evolving. And the children that were in the program last year are not going to be the same children this year. Even if they are the same children, they're different last month than they are this month because of their rapid development. So it is kind of an ever-changing space. And so it's important to let go of the idea that the playground or that the outdoor area is a fixed asset, right? That it's like this large, expensive structure, and that's what it is from here on out. We want it to be a much more organic experience. So thinking about who is in your program and what are their experiences with the outdoors. Are you in an urban environment and children are not getting a lot of time outdoors, and so therefore they need, as much as you can give them and perhaps some of the most basic experiences? Are you in a place where children are spending lots of time outdoors in their normal everyday lives. And so your outdoor experiences in your classroom can be much more advanced or detailed, or things that parents really can't get into, like gardening, maybe, or composting, or some of the things that maybe even tree climbing, things that parents might not be the first ones to jump on board with. So really think about who your children are, where your comfort level is with nature and risk, and then where should you start as far as meeting all of those things where they are.
Yeah, that's good. So, when you're thinking about these things, some essential components I think would come to my mind, and you brought up one is like safety, engagement, and growth. So, tell me a little bit more about like how we would consider those things as we build out, if you will, our green space.
One thing we forget as adults is, this is going to sound odd, but how small children are. Therefore, their impression of risk is far different than ours. So you can look at the playscapes that we build in parks and public schools, and you can see that an adult was trying to create a risky or like engaging space, and it's 5 feet off the ground. Well, when you're 3 feet tall, that's unnecessary, right? So thinking about bringing everything a little bit lower allows for the kind of risk that children can readily engage in without being in danger or being a hazard. So, I mean, it's kind of like fall zones. If you need a fall zone, it's probably too high because you're afraid someone's going to fall.
Yeah.
So we try and keep everything in our playgrounds, 25 inches or lower, because a big stump that's 2 feet tall is plenty for a child to feel like they're on top of the world, that they can jump off of or jump to another one. But the risk is quite reasonable for that age. So think in terms of what's exciting for a child. Young children can't even walk past, a parking curb without balancing along it the whole walk. So their brains are naturally seeking risk at every turn. So when they are faced with a, just same everyday structure, that's when they start engaging in behaviors we would call dangerous, like going up the slide or climbing the outside of the structure, because they've done everything that structure can do, and now their brain is compelling them to really push the limits. So thinking about movement and risk in terms of the children's bodies instead of adult bodies allows for more flexibility, because you're not having to think about fall zones and use zones and all of that. But also it creates a space that's very much at the child's level. So logs, stumps, sandboxes, mud kitchens, water tables, hills and creek beds, elements that are on the ground and in nature, garden boxes and compost piles, all of those things are right there at the children's fingertips, and therefore they can engage in them without any assistance from an adult, and that's a really important piece.
You described that so beautifully that I can envision it in my brain, and I want to play there now. and you're right. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated. Like I hear the teachers, and I can hear them right now in my head. So when our kids go outside, there's this one area that has pavement, and after it rains, we get puddles, and I continually hear them stay out of the puddle. I'm like, are you crazy? These kids are 2.5 years old. A puddle is magic. Right? A magic. It costs you nothing,
It's
and a
free.
puddle that's free. It costs you nothing, and they love it, and they will spend at least 20 minutes in that puddle, splashing and looking at it, seeing what they can float in it. So you're right. So these natural elements, kids are just instinctively drawn to them. They're instinctively drawn to them, and they don't have to be big, risky things, as you said. So let's talk about how green spaces, because I know how I feel about them, but how do green spaces contribute to children's physical and emotional development?
Well, it connects them to the earth and to their environment. I mean, we are, earthbound humans. This is our natural environment. And no matter where you're born on this planet, your body is equipped to handle it, right? So being outdoors connects us with our habitat, and also gives us a sense of wonder and curiosity, and a very natural sense of, science and what's happening here, and there's just cause and effect everywhere you look. Also, brains are developing rapidly during these first few years, and those synaptic connections are developed based on novel experiences, right? And so children need lots of interesting and new experiences to be happening during those first 3 years. And the outdoors is kind of, it's already providing that. It's providing temperature changes, pressure changes, lighting changes, smells and sounds and textures. It's all baked in. So you don't have to even like do so much work to create a space that's sensory engaging and sensory kind of developing like the outdoors can do. So even, when you take your tiny babies outside and you lay them on a blanket on the grass and they're looking up at, whatever they're looking at, they can do that for so long, just like your 2-year-old's playing in the
Yeah.
puddle. When I often remind adults that you should be a little bit bored when children are engaged in something because they are going to stay engaged in things that are too simple for you for way longer than you can deal with, and that's good. That's their job. So it is hard for us as adults not to push them to a more exciting activity or to put a toy in front of their face because they've been watching a shadow on the tree for so long, or engage them in something new, but instead to leave them to that autonomy. And that, when we think about our childhood memories, almost everyone starts to talk about times when they were outdoors. When you say, what did you play when you were a child? Almost everyone starts with an outdoor memory. And that's just because our outdoor memories are bigger. They are unrestricted by the building we were in, by the experience we were having. And even as we reflect back on things we did outside, like people will say, my parents took me to the beach every summer. And their parents like, we went twice. But in our mind, it becomes
Yeah.
this much bigger memory because the outdoor experience just takes up more space in the brain because there's so many sensory factors. Even your eyesight, right? If you're indoors, you can only see as far as the wall. But when you're outside, your eye can stretch as far as it can stretch. And so you're seeing these very different sensory type experiences. And so when children are outside, they tend to be freer, they tend to be more independent, they tend to be further away from adults. They create a little bit more space between them and their caregivers, and caregivers tend to give them that space a little bit more outside. So they get to flex that autonomy, that problem solving, that socializing with other children, and it's less interrupted or governed by adults. So there's lots of reasons being outside is fantastic. Some of them have to do with nature. Some of them just really have to do with being outside and the way that we kind of play when we're outside. But it is a well-rounded experience that takes very little effort from the adult.
Yeah. We have garden boxes at our school, and I feel like when you're in green spaces, there's a little sense of peace that also comes in being in those spaces. And I do think adults can learn a lesson or two from those children because, as adults, we tend to be very busy ourselves, run around, run around. But when you think about times that you feel very much at peace, it might be when you're sitting enjoying a cup of coffee and staring at those same clouds, or sitting in a garden, right? So that's I feel like the same experience for children too. It brings a sense of not only wonder, but a sense of peace and connectedness. Like you had said, connected for sure. One of my favorite places is Arizona. I visited twice there this year, and I'm from the East Coast, and so going to a desert doesn't at first didn't sound like it was going to be as life changing as it was, but it was so distinctly different than the environment that I was used to, and it was just I literally was probably like a kid. I stood in a labyrinth staring at the sun for probably five or 6 minutes, just listening to birds, and I'm sure anybody around me was like, "What is this lady doing?" But I was just so taking all of it in. It was just really beautiful. So those natural landscapes really can do that. I think it was probably the most breathtaking sunset that I've ever seen in my entire life in Arizona. So
It's
I
such
feel like,
that's such a good
yeah,
example of kind of the experience that children are having because what probably was so remarkable to you about being there was that it's so different from where you
Yeah.
live. And the expansiveness of it was just really something that you don't get to experience in the kind of area that you live in. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of like someone from Arizona staring at the ocean and just being
Yeah.
like overwhelmed with this sense of like, I don't even have, kind of a framework for
Yes.
processing this until I've spent some time in it. And so our brains, when we're outside and we're in nature, we produce more dopamine, and it's a neurotransmitter and it helps us learn, but it also just makes us happy,
Yeah.
and it makes us feel connected and warm towards one another. It's kind of like when you have a newborn baby and you're at the end of your rope trying to figure out what to do for them to make them happy. We almost always naturally just walk outside with them. Even if no one's told us to do that, we think maybe we'll go outside. We've tried everything else, and that
Yeah.
is kind of a natural instinct to seek the outdoors as a comfort.
So sometimes when we're talking about, outside spaces, we might have to consider when I'm thinking about the garden boxes, like what are some child-friendly plants or features that should be included in a childcare play space?
Yeah, such a great question. So, of course, different things grow everywhere. So try and go with native things, because children are, as much as they love nature, they're actually not very diligent gardeners, and teachers actually are pretty busy. So we don't want things that require too much maintenance. Herb gardens, I think, are probably herb gardens and flower gardens, butterfly gardens, those types of things are probably the most satisfying to young children. For one thing, the aromas, and you can taste them, and there's a lot of ways to experience the plants. They're also hardy. They're meant super hardy and healthy and pretty easy to grow. Things like sunflowers that have a lot of use after the plant has flowered, and so think about loose parts in terms of your plants. We love to put trees on playgrounds that we don't want in our yards because they make a mess, right? So like the flowering trees, or trees with acorns or whatever, like things that are just going to kind of create things that children can use in their play and gathering up into their pockets and in their mud kitchens and that sort of thing. So we don't want children to feel restricted by the plants. We don't want to feel like you can't pick that. You have to, but as they get older, they will learn to think about the health of the plant when they're harvesting from it, and how what will work and what won't. But the plants are there as a learning tool, and something that children should be allowed to experience and to care for in a way that they think is appropriate with guidance from their adult teacher. So tomatoes, melons, watermelons are always fun to watch, and pumpkins are fun to watch growing, and tomatoes that kind of keep producing, and so it really just anything that's kind of hardy and ever changing, which is I guess probably a description of a lot of plants, ever changing. but we don't want things that we have to warn them against putting it in their
Sure.
mouth, or
Sure.
we don't want it to be a no space. So thinking carefully about what's toxic or not toxic, what's safe,
Yeah.
and then making sure there's plenty of that in the space, and things that attract butterflies too.
Yeah. So, my daughter loves sunflowers, and we've had some teachers that are really great at planting. The only thing I would say about sunflowers is be a little strategic as to the placement of where you put them, because bees really do love those sunflowers. So we learned that pretty quickly. So we put them a little further away from where the kids are really, really busy, because although it's cool to see, the bees coming in and out and pollinating, those just do attract quite a bit of bees. So we now are very specific of where we put the sunflowers, but they are beautiful, and everybody loves the sunflowers. So
It's a process of adjusting every year, learning
yes,
from your environment and making adjustments.
I learned that. Do you have, as a consultant, because I know you go out to other programs and help them create their green spaces, do you have like a checklist or something that you use to make sure that there's safety in mind when designing green spaces for children?
We do. We use, of course, whatever licensing standards apply or childcare minimum standards, but more than that, we use the Caring for Our Children standards of safety that is put out by the American Pediatric Association.
Yep.
And so we check everything against that. We find that to be the most standardized and kind of across the board. And it really, if you're meeting those, you're usually doing pretty well on whatever the localized standards are. We also like to start any consultation for an outdoor space with observation of the classroom and the space, and then lots of conversations and possibly some trainings and meetings with teachers. Because teachers, their comfort with nature, plus their comfort with risk and mess, and all of those things are going to make a difference in how the children interact with the playground. So there's some playgrounds that we need to start with turf and sand and garden boxes. We don't want to run in with water and mud kitchens and little tiny stones and cobbles and things that teachers might fear. So we want to look at what is the level of comfort of the staff, and then create a space where both teachers and children are comfortable, but also being, scaffolded and challenged into a bit more comfort with nature and risk.
So let's say someone's like really adventurous, like I am, and they say, I want all the things. So can you describe how natural elements like water or sensory gardens can really enhance children's learning experiences?
Well, when we create a dynamic space outside with plants, with water, with landscaping and trees, then we're creating a sustainable space environmentally, right? So we are kind of hedging against global warming or, crazy weather patterns because we are creating shade and water play. So here in Texas, it gets crazy hot, right? And it stays hot for like 4 months. I mean, we're talking, over 100 degrees. And so my school is a nature preschool. We try to be outside almost the entire day. In the high heat of the summer, that can be really challenging, and also not always doable. Sometimes we have to go in and soak up some air conditioning. But the incorporating shade, plants, and water is really what makes your playground like weather friendly. So we often, kind of a staple to any playground we create, is a dry creek bed that is built in such a way that it naturally collects rainwater. But it also has like a hand pump children can use to pump water down like a ramp or a trough into the creek bed. And then it's not enough water to pool and be, a water risk, but it is enough for splashing and playing in and experimenting with. And it keeps them cool, of course. So we want water play on the playground for that reason, but also because we don't want children to fear getting wet. We want them to play in the rain. We want them to, experience these things. And it takes children a good long time to get comfortable with that sometimes. Not everyone wants their hands wet or their hands muddy. And so providing the kind of environment where the child is in it day in and day out gives them all the time they need to kind of adjust to that feeling, to dabble in it until, to their level of comfort. So we also, of course, loved some traditional toys like, big dump trucks and shovels and bikes and balls and those types of things. But it's always interesting that if you walk outside on the playground with a couple of gardening gloves in your hand, it doesn't matter what someone's playing with. They want to know what you're going to do. They want to know, how can they get some gloves and what can they get engaged in, because they want to connect with the space. They want to do what adults do. They want to use real tools. They want to have real outcomes. And so those kinds of things on the playground really create that ownership of the space for children, which, leads to them really thinking differently about the way they treat their space.
Yeah. So Maybe you share some of the maybe common challenges that you have faced when you're creating green spaces?
Oh my gosh, there are many, and they are I mean, we've had clients who asked us how we were going to attach the boulders to the ground. And you're like, well, just gravity. It's going to hold it there. It, you know, weighs
The
1,500
boulder.
pounds. Like it's going to stay put. Or like, how will we keep the stumps from disintegrating? We won't. They will disintegrate over time. That's kind of part of the appeal of the children getting to watch that happen. So it does take thinking differently about the materials as not forever materials. They are, they're naturally occurring, and therefore they're, kind of an easy consumable that we can replace pretty simply. So it's not like we're investing in this piece of furniture that's going to have to last us forever.
Sure.
So that we do like a nice finished look. Curb appeal is important to childcare owners and directors, as it should be. And so being able to create a beautiful space that stays looking nice all year round. People worry about the maintenance and the, kind of lawn work that might be involved in an outdoor playground. So these are kind of the typical questions we go through. And then we get to the risky ones. We get to, when you have stumps and logs, you're going to have surfaces that aren't smooth. You're going to have, if you have cobbles, you have rocks that children can pick up. We are very strategic about the size of rocks we use for the age of the child, so that it takes two children perhaps to lift one, so therefore it's not a throwing hazard, but it still gives some nice heavy work. There's lots of, thinking about things that goes into it. And it's mostly risks, fear of mess and fear of injury. And then for some, just fear of disarray, like it not looking, like perfectly polished
Yeah.
all the time. So those are our typical challenges, and they just take time to work through. Lots of examples, lots of touring other programs, lots of listening and understanding our approach to it. And then because we're a professional development company first and foremost, it's a lot of training on both sides. So it's training prior to, and then after the playground goes in, lots of coming back and doing follow-up training and helping, being a resource to the teachers as they try and navigate the space and find out for themselves how children are going to use things and whether or not they're comfortable with that.
So that really helps me just go right into my next question is, how can educators and caregivers use green spaces to encourage environmental awareness and responsibility in young children? And is that something that you teach in your courses with teachers?
Yeah, so we have gardening curriculum and nature preschool inspired curriculum and activities that we share with our clients, and then it's really remarkable when you start this journey of having even just plants in your classroom, even just, something in your classroom, a potted plant, a fish, things that just connect children with nature a little bit, having, pine cones and acorns for loose parts rather than feeling like it always needs to be a manufactured piece. You start to notice that children treat those materials differently. And so learning to observe and allow time for children to, find their own use of these kinds of loose parts, and being open and responsive to the questions that come when children are engaging with materials they don't normally engage in, and kind of in supporting that curiosity. But I think that it's always surprising to providers and educators that we can do anything outside that we can do inside. So outside is not just for big body play. It's for art and reading and writing and so much science and sensory. And so anything that's being done inside can be taken outside. And that is often just like a hard stop in our conversations where we have to really back up and think about that again. When you think about children taking baby dolls outside, or creating a a kitchen or dramatic play center outside, it takes a while for us to wrap our heads around that for some reason. So, how are we going to get the materials out there? How are we going to get them back in? How are we going to organize them? How are we going to keep them safe from the weather? Like all these kind of logistic concerns that children are pretty capable of solving themselves if we'll, put them to them. Like, okay, you can bring your dolls outside, but how will you keep your doll safe, from the weather? Oh, I'll bring it in when I can. Okay, great, as long as you have a plan. So, especially in high heat, we want to do kind of more relaxed activities outside. So we might read under the trees instead of running around if it's 110 degrees.
Yeah.
And there might be different activities that you do in really cold and snowy places. I don't know what those are. I don't know what it's like to be that cold. But yeah, so I mean, I think probably one of the best experiences of being in a place where you go outside when it's really cold is the prep, the getting ready and the getting unready. Like it's an activity in and of itself. Like just lean into it. Like what are you going to do for 45 minutes except hang up wet clothes and change socks and all of those things. So just remembering that anything that's done inside can be done outside, and that you don't need a very specialized curriculum to do that. You just want children to be super comfortable with being outdoors, which means they should be able to bring the things they like doing outside. As you observe your children outdoors, you're going to kind of naturally start moving towards more nature-inspired activities. Because you're having a chance to observe children outside and seeing what they're curious and interested in. And nature is going to kind of just introduce itself. There's going to be a lizard. There's going to be a bird's nest. There's going to be bees around the flowers.
Yeah.
It's going to present itself, and we want to take those offerings of curriculum and use them.
Yeah. I love music outside. We incorporate music outside so frequently. We do marching bands, we do concerts, or sometimes, as you said, bringing out the art materials. We definitely love to do that, and we might play some jazz music or classical music or things that just like kind of stimulate brain activity. Yeah. So as we start to wrap up, maybe what trends or innovations are emerging in design for outdoor spaces in early childhood education, especially for urban areas?
I think we're seeing more and more artificial turf, which I know feels like not a natural playground at all, but it actually kind of provides a good gateway to nature by allowing spaces that are shared spaces like church play yards that are easier to maintain, but that still are not that kind of concrete or plastic or wood chip surfacing. So we're seeing a lot more turf. But we're seeing a lot more comfort with adding those natural elements on top of that. So having big sandboxes where children can really get in there and dig, and it's deep and it's large enough where they can really like collaborate. Mud kitchens, of course, have been having their day, and really getting comfortable with partnering that mud kitchen with your sandbox or with your discovery table so that it really can truly be a messy center. Getting comfortable with, teachers and directors are trying to think about how to equip children for outdoors, like how do we train parents on how to be comfortable with sending their children the type of clothes that can be worn in all weather or that they can get messy in, with barefoot play, with whatever it is that's kind of feels like it might be a new experience for young children. But really, there is such a great movement away from plastic primary colors. And I am so happy that that's happening because I'm not sure why we were doing that to begin with. But I think that this feeling that natural materials are safer materials, both from a microbial standpoint, but also from a less height, less those risk kind of pieces. So we are seeing lots of interest in moving away from plastic. It is still a challenge to think about things that aren't long-term sustainable. So that's, I think, really where our industry is needing to be innovative is how to create outdoor and nature spaces that are natural and truly natural and therefore changing with the weather, but that allow for that sustainability that that childcare centers need.
Yeah. Thank you for such an engaging and interesting conversation. It certainly gives a lot to think about and be reflective of. And for those of you who are tuning in today, I know you guys love to learn. So while you're here, I'd love to invite you to our 2025 Early Childhood Empowerment Conference on May 2nd and 3rd at the Crown Plaza in Warwick. I will leave the link below, but we would love to have you come and continue to learn with all of us and, continue to have conversations about new industry trends, what you can do to set yourself apart, because let's face it, competition in early childhood education continues to grow. And so you have to be innovative as a small business owner. And again, just doing things that set your business apart. So, as always, remember it's the small details that make a big impact on the success of your childcare business. That's all for today. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Ugh.